Welcome everybody to this, the second of the EIS's climate change webinars. My name is Susan Quinn. I am the education convener for the EIS and I will be your chairperson this evening, continuity announcer I suppose in terms of where we're going. A really exciting event this evening and a few bits of housekeeping before we get started. We are so grateful to you for coming along to this event this evening. We have a significant number of people signed up for it, and it shows the commitment and to climate change, but also to climate change education of the EIS members, and we're really delighted to have you here. We're also delighted to have a wide range of speakers and presenters this evening, and we look forward to hearing from them. We're broadcasting this webinar live on Facebook. If you are tweeting about the event, if you can use the hashtag EIS webinars, that will help us to continue to promote this beyond the event. The chat function is opened so that you can ask any questions of any of the presenters. Please do so throughout the course of this evening. Don't just wait to the very end and think of one, put one out there. To put them in the chat function, and we will collate them at the end and take them when we've heard from all the presenters, so that we can ask and see where we take that forward. Before I introduce our first speaker, I just also want to look at the other work that the EIS is doing in terms of this in the run up to COP26. There are lots of events going on, so we have two further webinars post October breaks. We also have a call to all our members who are doing work on climate change education to share that with your colleagues via our online portal, and you can get details around that, and an online exhibition of pupil work on the EIS website, dedicated area around climate change on www.eis.org.uk/climate change. A great opportunity. There is so much good work going on in our education establishments. Please don't be frightened to share your work. Please don't be frightened to share the work of your pupils and students, because there is so much quality and excellence out there that is valuable to be shared with our members and with your colleagues. So it brings me to our first speaker this evening, and a great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Davery, where we're going to look tonight at how Scotland can help ensure that every young person leaves education climate literate and equipped with the skills and knowledge needed to tackle climate change. So our first speaker is Professor Davery, and Dave has researched and taught on climate change for over 25 years, creating and delivering a wide range of climate change courses, including the award-winning Masters in Carbon Management. He was awarded the Chancellor's Award for Teaching in 2018 and the RSGS President's Medal in 2021 for his contributions to climate change education. Dave, I'm delighted to have you here this evening, and I'll pass straight over to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Susan, and it's wonderful to be here. Thank you to you and Leslie and the others for inviting me. So yeah, I wanted to get into, I suppose, hopefully what will come out of COP26 in terms of climate change education, but also to give a bit of a context going into it, because it's such a big meeting, not just for us in Scotland, but actually the whole world. And one of the key things about it, obviously, is this context of the pandemic, of COVID, and the kind of green recovery narrative. And as part of that, the issue, I guess, with the pandemic, in terms of how it's exacerbated inequalities, so around the world, but also in Scotland and the UK, it's made access to education sometimes much more challenging, as all of you know all too well, but also just in terms of the opportunities for training and for careers as well. I think there's a real risk that everyone feels disempowered essentially in terms of those opportunities, but there's an absolute imperative that those opportunities are there, because if we're going to tackle climate change, if we're going to make that transition in a just way in Scotland and globally, then we need to get it right in terms of education, training from the university level, the college level, all formal education and beyond. So one of the key, I guess, contexts as well with COP26 that's coming up is that climate change didn't go away. Obviously, with the pandemic, it's still intensifying. We had a blip in terms of emissions in 2020, so they went down kind of 6 or 7% globally, and they bounced back. So we are certainly not on course for the Paris climate goals, and COP26 is all about getting us back on course. That's what the negotiations are focused at. Is really will all the nations of the world commit more action so that we can get on track for limiting warming to 1.5 degrees during this century. I guess one of the major contexts for us in Scotland is we already have ambitious climate targets, but we've got that same context as every country in the world of coming out of the pandemic, wanting to make that recovery green, and having to change our sectors really rapidly to meet the targets. So I picked out kind of 4 that are dear to my heart, I suppose, that probably make our ministers in Scotland sweat when they think about net zero transition in terms of how to do it. So the first one would be energy, and we've got a success story there in terms of wind energy, but a huge demand for increased renewables, a real demand for the people that will support that industry, for the transition for oil and gas sector workers, so the reskilling there. But also a massive part of the next generation, I guess, of the workforce will be on zero carbon energy for Scotland. So making sure that, I guess, we as education providers are ahead of the curve a bit on that is really important, given the speed of the change. Transport is another sector which I think is going to be really challenging because it's our biggest source of emissions in Scotland. Again, huge changes in terms of how we work, like this meeting being online. So many of our meetings and our transport habits have changed, but that's going to see huge changes in terms of how we move around when we do move in terms of electrification. Again, real big demands there in terms of new skills and education, but also some real challenges in terms of making that a just transition from current kind of fossil fuel transport means. The built environment is one that is again huge for Scotland, because we've got a target in Scotland for over 1 million homes to be heated through low and zero carbon sources of energy by 2030. That's massive. That's 50% of our homes. And for any of us who've just had a boiler replaced recently, we know the hassle of that. If you're talking about a heat pump or some of these other technologies, then that's a big barrier to get across in terms of the money and the hassle factor, but also, again, having those people trained up to actually do that work, to give us good advice in terms of energy efficiency, a really big one, again, for our government and all of us to kind of realise. And the final one I wanted to mention, because it's dear to my heart, is the Lanyu sector. So that's one where we've already got big changes happening because of leaving the EU, but that can deliver us not just big emission reductions, but also a lot of carbon uptake. So through tree planting, peatland restoration, those nature-based solutions, again, that's a huge area where we need people who understand what to do, have the skills, and that's something which has to happen rapidly. So all of those sectors, everyone on this call is part, I suppose, of underpinning progress on those. If the workforce don't have the skills, if the school leavers don't have the knowledge, the college and university leavers, then none of this progress can happen at the speed it needs to happen. So in terms of the work that's gone on in the run-up to COP26 around this agenda, and we'll go on hopefully with even more impetus from COP26. In Scotland in particular, we've had a thing called the Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan. So that came out just before Christmas last year. And that was really about the skills and education context for all of the climate change commitments in Scotland. And what it did was establish that we needed to know more, that it was relevant across every sector, but also every area in Scotland in terms of understanding those local contexts, what the education kind of provision was, but also what the job opportunities were, what the job creation was going to be to allow us this net zero transition. So one of the key things from that report and the work that's ongoing, and on a UK basis from the Green Jobs Task Force, was really identifying that green jobs are usually pinned to renewables, those kind of jobs, or being a climate geek like me. Actually, every job is going to be greened to some extent, because we are already living in a climate emergency, but living in a world where our economy, everything we do is geared to that transition to net zero. So that needs to then be reflected in obviously what we provide, in my case as a university, but also colleges, schools, and from employers. One of the major things that came out from both is that, particularly in the context of the pandemic, we need to inspire both young people and those who are looking to reskill and change their careers, to map out what those green career pathways are and support them through it, to make sure it's a lifelong offering, so that we don't end up with, for instance, that just transition issue for people who are in work in oil and gas sector, actually hugely skilled people who can really help lead the transition to net zero. And what came through very strongly when we were looking at the evidence base to try and get ahead of the curve in terms of where demand was going to be, how we needed to, I guess, mainstream climate education and net zero aligned education, was understanding place and time. So what was happening, like I said before, in terms of local context and listening to those voices, like, EIS is a perfect example where you do that, and that is so powerful. But also in terms of time, some sectors are moving really fast and expanding fast. So making sure that our provision, for my university, we're really bad at this, making sure our provision aligns in time as well as space for what employers require, what Scotland requires. I guess all of this, it underpins that transition to net zero, a big just transition element to it. And part of our enablers and recommendations through these reports tried to move us towards that and join up some of the dots. So for Scotland, we now have the Green Skills Workforce Academy, which is more of a vision than a fait accompli so far. But what the idea is that if you are someone of any age and you want to find out what a green career is, where the training opportunities are, what the standards and the hires, or not standards anymore, are they? NAT 5s and hires are that are relevant to you, what apprenticeships, what degrees might get you into the career you want. Then there's a one-stop shop through Skills Development Scotland, which will provide that. And at the moment, it's high level, it's okay, and hopefully it gives some good guidance. But there's a real job there to make it relevant to everyone in Scotland, wherever you are in terms of location, whatever career you want to follow. Like I say, it's going to have a green element. Through the Green Jobs Task Force in particular, we looked at curriculum and exam boards, the role of them in terms of helping reform that curriculum or align it in terms of the needs of the net zero transition. And as a key part of that was in terms of making sure there's training available for educators at all levels, so CPD, that actually is overtly linked with those requirements. One of the things we called on, which we got a lot of pushback from the UK government, was actual investment in terms of having climate ambassadors or champions within schools or going into schools to help every school to build that capacity in a busy environment where there are lots of demands, to make sure that this is not a bolt-on, but actually it is mainstreamed, and that there's time allowed for that and investment in it for it to be sustainable. And really we summed it up, particularly in our advice to UK government and through the Scottish Government report as well, that we need this call to action, that there's so much great practice going on, but actually a lot of that great practice is in silos, it's not shared, or the capacity to expand that right across Scotland or the UK is limited by often investment, by time. And so that's where particularly government and employers can step in and help address some of those barriers. For the universities and colleges and COP26, we've got a huge role, I think, I would hope, in terms of doing some of the stuff we do already in terms of co-developing resources, but actually learning, what works well, making sure that, again, that's accessible for every school, for instance, rather than just a select number of schools, helping with those ambassadors like we have through the STEM ambassadors, but looking at how that can align actually with what's needed for climate change action and net zero. And a major part for me is the careers support. You know, in my own organisation, it's imperfect, definitely, in terms of allowing our students to identify what they need to achieve while they're at the university to actually get them the career they want, and to, in most cases, align with net zero quite overtly. And so we absolutely have a role to improve on that, but also hopefully to help schools and help school leavers see that pathway, whether it is into university or apprenticeships or straight into the workplace or into college, what that means, what they need to do to follow that path. So at COP26, so just to flag some of the things that are going on there. So Skills Sunday, so the middle Sunday, if you can bear it, because weekends are precious, I know. But the middle Sunday, the 7th, is called Skills Sunday, and it's around, there's a lot of Department for Education stuff, there's a lot of stuff from Scottish Government around climate education, green careers events. So there's a green career pathway event in the morning at 9:30. So if you get a coffee on and join that, or you can come and join us in person in Glasgow, that should be really good, just in terms of hearing about different routes into green careers, some of the barriers people have faced in terms of education, in terms of opportunity, but how they can be addressed. The other thing with COP26 is, yes, it's going to be an intense 2 weeks of climate change media coverage, of people asking, have we done enough? Have we, you know, how do we move faster? The education piece is going to be strong there, but actually the 2 weeks is certainly not enough. It can only be a platform for more work. And so organisations like the Climate Education Partnership, Skills Development Scotland, and actually EIS, you know, the fact that this is front and centre in terms of this kind of event, what you're considering in terms of supporting schools across Scotland for climate change education, and that kind of, hopefully that green careers pathway, realising that that's going to be vital for not just those 2 weeks, obviously, but for the years to come. So I want to finish really just summing up why it's just a huge passion for me. I mean, you know, it's the best thing in life, isn't it? Teaching, but to be able to teach at the moment is a massive privilege, actually, to be able to get back in and see the students face to face. But what they are desperate for, my students, is to be part of this net zero transition, often you know, wanting to actively take a role professionally and personally in tackling climate change. And there's a real opportunity in Scotland for us to actually realise the green recovery narrative, the things that politicians talk about a lot, actually fixing some of the mistakes that were made long before the pandemic in terms of those inequalities in our society. So actually providing opportunity, particularly in areas where we've got high deprivation, low access to jobs. Green recovery, particularly in Scotland, can help us address those. Addressing the climate emergency, absolutely, in terms of cutting emissions, but more important than that, I think, is the kind of the wider scope in terms of the co-benefits. So addressing the nature crisis, I talked about the nature-based solutions. That's all about, yes, tackling climate change, but also protecting and enhancing our biodiversity. And that's so crucial for us, particularly in Scotland, because land use change is going to be a major part of our transition to net zero. The just transition principles and achieving that, I talked about the kind of the opportunity we've got actually of addressing those deep-rooted inequalities, a lot of them going back to the mistakes made in the 80s in terms of deindustrialization. Now we've got this green industrial revolution, as the Prime Minister calls it. I think he's got a different view of it than most people when he says that, but actually the opportunity underneath it to actually give access to training, education, good careers for everyone in Scotland is huge. I know I'm kind of preaching to the converted, but what I always end in terms of summarising where we are with COP26 is, in terms of green recovery, in terms of climate emergency, the nature crisis and just transition, actually they'll be talked about, all of them, a lot at COP, but the key one, the one that underpins all of them, is going to be education and getting that right. Thank you.
Dave, thank you so much for your contribution there. Certainly hit home and a number of things. Certainly made me sit up and think. Just having had an air source heat pump fitted with all of the trauma that goes with that, you were bringing back a wee bit of PTSD for me around it, but really crucial for us in terms of thinking about how we can get involved with this in education. And our colleagues across the education sectors in Scotland would absolutely agree with you that the issues around investment, issues around having the time and resources to be able to do this, that education around climate change is something that our colleagues are passionate about, it's something that their young people are passionate about, but it's got to be recognised by politicians and others that this needs to be given the time and space to be able to do it properly. So thank you so much for getting us started this evening. Colleagues, I'm reminding you that the chat function is open. It would be good if you've got any questions for Dave that you pop those in just now before we move on to our next speaker and you get caught up in listening to the next fascinating contribution, so that, like me, if you forget what it was you wanted to ask, you've already asked it and it's there. But I'm moving on then swiftly to our second contributor this evening, and we welcome Sally Romilly. Sally has been a global learning advisor for 25 years for the One World Centre. To see the links here, colleagues, people who have been committed to climate change education for 25 years, both Dave and Sally, people who are making sure that this is something that we take forward. One of the 5 development education centres in Scotland is offering professional learning sessions and resources for teachers on global citizenship education. She also is a voluntary activist and speaker for Greenpeace. Sally, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Susan, and to Leslie for inviting me. And I thoroughly enjoyed listening to Prof. Ray. And I could see that a lot of the things I was going to be talking about tonight, totally working in with what Professor Ray was saying, particularly around equality and the idea of a just transition. So I am now going to attempt to share my screen. So please bear with me for a wee minute. And just while I'm doing that, just to say that yes, I am a volunteer speaker and activist with Greenpeace, and I have been for some time. And what you should see coming up on your screen very shortly is a picture of some of my Dundee Greenpeace fellow activists and some of the activities that we've been involved in. So just to say a little bit about the One World Centre, we are a small not-for-profit organisation specialising in education for global citizenship and sustainable development. And we do provide resources, some of which I'll show you tonight, and also professional learning. And although I'm based in Dundee and covering the Tayside area, there are centres across the whole of Scotland, so regardless of where you are, there will be a development education centre that will be able to support you. So just to have a think about what I'm going to try and do tonight is a wee bit of a hybrid, joining together these 2 roles and just trying to show how both Greenpeace and the development education centres can support you as teachers. So I'll give you a reintroduction to Greenpeace, what it operates, how it campaigns, and what it's working on at the moment. We'll have a quick look at how the work of Greenpeace can support teachers in your providing of learning for sustainability, which is an entitlement for all learners. And as I say, I'll flag up some resources and professional learning opportunities. But before I do any of that, I was wanting to ask the question, pose a wee question to you. What is it that pops into your mind when you hear the name Greenpeace? What are the thoughts, the words, the images? And if you're able to, if you can pop these into the chat, I'm not sure I can actually see the chat at the moment, but we can maybe come back to these later. Any thoughts from anybody on what does Greenpeace mean?
So Sally, you'll not be able to see the chat, but people are popping in things like activism, rainbow boat, rainbow warrior, care for the environment, targeting illegal whalers, peaceful, eco-friendly, saving seals. So that's some of the chat, some of the thoughts.
That's great, thanks. Actually, it is just now popping up for me, so that's great. Yep, lots of things. All of these things are agreeing with people who care deeply, saving the planet, and somebody's mentioned the Rainbow Warrior. So that's great. So as somebody did mention the Rainbow Warrior, I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is actually not the Rainbow Warrior though, but it is one of the 3 international ships that Greenpeace has. This is the Arctic Sunrise. All of the ships have been very active recently, and they are sort of the iconic face of Greenpeace, if you like. But basically what Greenpeace is trying to do, it's about protecting and defending the natural world and working for a green and peaceful future for everybody. And it's just actually celebrated its 50th anniversary. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. In some ways it's great that, you know, Greenpeace is still out there doing what it needs to do. But in other ways, you think, well, here we are 50 years on, and we still haven't learned, you know, how to care for this planet that we all share. So how it all started, going back to the event in 1971, it was a small group of guys who sailed out to Untitled Island off Alaska to try and stop nuclear testing. They actually weren't successful initially, straight away, but the Untitled Island is now a bird sanctuary. So I suppose the message is you have a good idea, you take the responsibility and you take action, stand up and do something about it, and eventually, hopefully, things will change. And on the right is the very first Greenpeace boat, the Phyllis Cormac, which was, like the first Rainbow Warrior, actually a converted fishing vessel. So the core values of Greenpeace, I mentioned a wee bit earlier about personal responsibility, and I think that does link in very much with global citizenship education and the values of global citizenship about taking responsibility for your actions and having the belief that people can bring about change, particularly with regard to the PISA results of 2018, which actually showed that in global competencies in Scotland, we did well on certain things, although surprisingly, children and young people in Scotland didn't seem to feel that they had a great sense of agency. And that did surprise me because, as has been mentioned earlier, there are some fantastic examples throughout Scotland of children and young people taking action on matters that are important to them for the greater good. Independence. Greenpeace is totally independent from governments and companies. It doesn't take any funding from them. All the money comes from individual donations, which means that they can criticise or praise as and when they will without being in anybody's pockets. The non-violent value is very important for me personally. I totally believe in the value of non-violence, which is slightly different from just not being violent. It's more about the whole process of how you go about things, and often in very creative ways to try and bring down the pillars of support of whoever it is that you're trying to change their behaviour. But certainly if you're on any Greenpeace actions, and I've been on a few national actions, you do have to go through non-violent direct action training to make sure that even just your body language, your expressions, everything that you do is non-confrontational. And the other value is internationalism, which we'll go on to have a look at just now, because Greenpeace recognises, we all know that the challenges that we face are global, and therefore the solutions have to be global as well. So here are all the Greenpeace offices. There are 61 offices across the world in 47 different countries. A lot of them you can see sort of centred around Europe, and indeed the headquarters, Greenpeace International, is based in Amsterdam. And Greenpeace has often been criticised as being very sort of Eurocentric, very white, very middle class. And they did take this on board, and over the last few years have greatly increased the number of offices, particularly the offices in the Global South, in the communities where they were fighting for the rights of these communities. It totally made sense to have the offices there, and the experience and expertise of experts actually on the ground. Volunteers play a great role in the campaigns of Greenpeace. So although there are 2,500 staff across all the Greenpeace offices, there are 25,000 volunteers. And these are the people, just ordinary people, who take a stand about something, who stand up and want to do something and to take action in some way to bring about change. And these people based in local communities give a local face to a campaign, and they also manage to multiply the effect that that campaign can have. So what do we campaign on? Well, not surprisingly, the climate emergency is right up there, and it has various different aspects to it. So it's about trying to tackle those that are providing the finance for the oil and gas industry, and building pipelines, for example. The oil industry, transport, which Prof. Ray has already mentioned, and the green recovery. I mean, certainly just after lockdown, when I thought that you might actually get a wee bit of a rest from Greenpeace activities, they were right on it in terms of sort of going into overdrive in a way, actually, on what we can do to try and bring about a green recovery. And there were lots of webinars on online talks, etc. And Greenpeace does in fact have a very detailed manifesto as to how we can go about recovering from the pandemic, but also in terms of tackling climate change and the nature crisis and the pandemic all in a one. Another main area that we campaign on is oceans, the importance of healthy oceans. And so the work has been around creating these ocean sanctuaries across the world to allow marine life to recover and thrive. It's been about tackling the huge problem of plastic in our oceans, and also the problem of overfishing, particularly from the likes of bottom trawlers and super trawlers who are hoovering up huge amounts of tons of fish through their factory fishing. And forests. And in terms of forests, it's more about forests being cleared and the land use. So forests being used, for example, to grow palm oil, forests being used to grow soya to feed animals, or indeed forests being cleared and used for cattle ranching. So these are the main campaigns internationally as well as in the UK. And the way that Greenpeace goes about campaigning, it needs to do a lot of homework before a campaign ever becomes public. There's been an awful lot of research done in the background. So there is a research laboratory at Sussex University where all the heavy-duty scientific stuff goes on. Lobbying is another thing that happens behind the scenes. So talking to politicians, talking to companies, trying to persuade them of the right path to take. And then finally taking action, which is the thing that most people will probably remember Greenpeace by. Often the high profile stuff like sailing out to try and stop an oil rig from drilling for more oil. But direct action can be something very simple, just as simple as signing a petition, anything that can actually make a difference. So the big taking action can be to raise awareness of a campaign initially, or it could be particularly to try and stop a particular action from happening. So this is an example of direct action here, where the message was trying to stop the government when they were planning to build the third runway at Heathrow. So high profile, certainly brave, some might think too brave. But interestingly, they're talking about a climate emergency. This photograph was taken in 2008. So it just shows Greenpeace has been talking about, it's been talking about climate change for decades, but it's been talking in terms of a climate emergency for well over 10 years now. And it does make me slightly angry in a way that the powers that be, if they had listened all this time ago, that we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in now, where we're having to do everything immediately and urgently. And it's going to be harder to get that just transition because we are taking such urgent action. Okay, so I'm not going to say too much about the science of climate change, because there are people in the room that will know a lot more about it than I do. Greenpeace has paid attention to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for many, many years, and that has informed what it has decided to do. And I think we all know that we need to cut back on fossil fuels. Perhaps less well known is the role of forests and oceans in helping to mitigate climate change because of their ability to absorb so much carbon. So roughly about half the amount of carbon that we put out into the atmosphere can be absorbed by the oceans and by the forests, and that's another reason for keeping them and making sure that they are healthy to maximise their ability to absorb carbon. Land use, I kind of mentioned land use already, but it is a big contributor to climate change. So when you chop down a forest, not only do you lose the ability of that forest to absorb CO2, but yes, you're losing the forest and its ability to absorb carbon. And one of the major reasons for that is industrial meat, which is one of Greenpeace's latest campaigns, which we'll come on to in a wee while. So Greenpeace, about a couple of years ago, launched for the very first time educational resources for young people. It did used to believe that there were, as there are, loads of stuff already out there, but there was demand for people, particularly on this idea of taking action, which is what Greenpeace is so well known for. And so they produced these resources, which are all available through the Greenpeace website. And as you can see, for 7 to 11-year-olds, 11 to 14, and then directly for young people to work themselves on for older people. And it comes under the various different campaigns. So whether it's plastics or whether it's climate or forests, there's a series of lessons and some suggested actions that young people can take. And one of the things that they produced, I don't know if any of you remember, there was a wee video that was narrated by Emma Thompson. It was 2 or 3 years ago about palm oil, and it was there's an orangutan in my bedroom. So the monster animation is a sort of a follow-on from that, and it's about a jaguar in my kitchen. And it's helping children and young people to see the connections between the actions that big companies are taking in terms of destroying forests for industrial meat, and what then happens to the animals and the people in the forest. So making these connections for them. And there's an animation on the website and supporting resources that we can use in the classroom. Now, I mentioned earlier about Greenpeace being seen as a white and Eurocentric organisation, and they've really taken that on board. and they're now promoting all the young activists, particularly those in the Global South, young people of colour who themselves are fighting for their own communities and for protecting their planet. So you can see this on the Greenpeace website. Also on there is a really interesting little video that's been put up to celebrate Black History Month. So it's looking at the connection between climate change and racism. So what it does, it explores how the most extreme impacts of climate change are mostly felt by people of colour and people in the Global South. So the hurricanes, the floods, the droughts, these things which are happening on average once a week, very often when you see them on the news, they're not connected to climate change, but the connection is not made. And that, in actual fact, climate change has been very much a contributing factor. So this video does explore this. It's only 6 minutes long, and I think it would be highly suitable, certainly for secondary ages. And it's just looking at that whole issue of equality. And the people that are suffering the most from climate change are ironically the people who have contributed least to it. So it's about looking at that equality issue. And again, sticking with activism and racism, this photograph was reported after a climate change conference in Davos in 2020, and there's Greta Thunberg, whom we all know, and some other climate activists at the conference. But what the media did not present in the papers was actually the whole picture. And the whole picture was that. So what they had done was they had cropped out Vanessa Nakati from Uganda, who is a young climate activist and who's Black. And this was obviously an issue of racism. And you wonder, you know, they were trying to do it presumably to try and perpetuate this idea of white saviour, of coming to the rescue of people who needed to be rescued from climate change. So I thought that was quite interesting. And that example is actually covered in a resource which I'm about to tell you about now. Exploring Climate Justice. This was put together by some of my colleagues within the wider development education network, but we also worked with the Royal Society of Chemistry, so they did all the heavy duty science bit at the beginning. Lots of activities and ideas for the classroom. It follows the sort of programme of inform, investigate, instigate, so young people find out about things, they can decide what they want to campaign on and then instigate some kind of action. But there's lots of activities and resources in there. And it's also making the connection between children's rights, which I know is very topical just now with what's happening with the Incorporation Bill. So how does climate change affect children and their rights across the world? So these are the development education centres that I mentioned right at the beginning, my lovely colleagues in the other centres across Scotland. So between us, we cover all 32 local authorities, and we can provide resources, advice and professional learning opportunities, not just around climate change, but the wider global citizenship agenda. Most of what we do is kind of, well, it's really using, I'm sure you'll be familiar with the global goals or the SDGs. They provide a really rich context for learning. And I actually did a session with a primary school last week who had been learning about the goals and wanting to know what Greenpeace was doing with regard to the goals. So we talked mostly about climate action, life below water and life on land, but we also looked at reduced inequalities and in particular responsible production and consumption. So there's actually a whole host of activities that you can access through the world's largest lesson there. And just to flag up target 4.7, which Professor Ray was really, I think, referring to earlier about the importance of educating this generation so that they have the skills and the knowledge and the confidence to go out there and create a fairer, more sustainable world. So target 4.7 really is the education for global citizenship and sustainable development. This is just a blatant plug really for a course that the One World Centre is doing in 2 parts later this month. But actually I was on a call with colleagues earlier, and there will be a national course on climate change so that everybody, regardless of where they're placed in Scotland, will be able to sign up for that. I also wanted to just remind people about the—
Sally, I'm really sorry, I'm going to need you to wrap up. We're moving into the time for the next people, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. I hadn't seen, I wasn't looking out for I should have been looking out for a signal. Right, okay, let's just move on. These things, I can send out links to these things afterwards.
Yeah. 34 seconds, sorry.
Okay, this is quite a good resource, a website. The equivalent of the One World Centre in South Yorkshire just produced a whole load of case studies looking at the importance and the success of non-violent action, and that would be a good thing to have a look at, particularly for PSE and RNPS. And I just wanted to finish on this quote. Thinking back to those guys in the boat in 1971, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Sally, for that. And colleagues, the presentation from Sally and all of the different resources that have been she was sharing there will be available after the webinar on the EIS website and everywhere else. So thank you, Sally, for your contribution. It's always helpful for educators to have links to quality resources that they can use there. And moving quickly on, I'll welcome to the webinar Charlotte Gardner and Louise Blair. They are here and they manage, Charlotte manages the iBite programme for Sustrans, and she's joined by her Sustrans teacher champion, Louise Blair, a primary teacher who will share about her experience of embedding active travel into the school environment. So some further practical contributions, colleagues, for how we can embed all of the work on climate education into the curriculum. Charlotte and Louise, thank you for your contributions.
Thanks so much, Susan, and thanks Leslie and EIS for inviting us to speak this evening, and thanks to everyone for joining. Yeah, I'm from Sustrans, and Sustrans is the charity making it easier for people to walk and cycle. I do manage the iBike programme, and what we do is encourage pupils to walk, cycle and scoot more for their daily journeys and within the school time as well. But I wanted to share some of the practical ways that we do that. We're very much focused on active travel, as I think Dave mentioned in his talk at the beginning. It's one of the biggest contributors to carbon emissions. So active travel, has a real part to play in how we tackle climate change. But it's also something that pupils can take part in and whole school communities can take part in. I think teaching children about climate change can feel quite disempowering for them. In fact, I think Sally even mentioned that there'd been a survey around that and how pupils did feel like they didn't have agency over it, where actually active travel is a way that they can really make a difference in terms of what they're doing. So I'm just going to try and share my presentation. I'll maybe skip over a little bit about what our project is. As I said, there are things that you can take away. You don't have to have our project running. We do have officers working in 10 local authorities around Scotland, delivering all sorts of different activities tailored to the school. So we work very much with the teachers in the school to develop appropriate measures for them. But they often include things like bike maintenance, teaching cycling skills, scooting skills, doing lead walks, and really trying to take the curriculum outside and using bikes and scooters and walking to really deliver lessons outside. Can everybody see what I'm sharing? No, I don't think I'm sharing my screen yet.
No, we're not getting it just
No.
yet. Oh, wait a minute, here we go.
So I'm going to go from the beginning. So yeah, I've gone over what our project is. You don't want to just take my word for it. We've got some nice quotes from teachers, and this really relates to how teachers feel about delivering some of these things. It's not just a way of tackling climate change. There are also other benefits that can be brought by bringing active travel into your school environment, including well-being, which is obviously massive, particularly this year, but you know, at any point. There's air quality benefits, you can tackle congestion around the school. It's a way of connecting with your local area as well. And as I said before, it's something that the children themselves can really connect with and get on board with, as something that they can take forward. So there's three ways that I thought would be most relevant, perhaps to teachers tuning in tonight, in terms of what you can take away and use. I've got some links to resources, which again I can share at the end. We've actually developed a resource around COP26 and how you can look at your neighbourhood, and it's around 20-minute neighbourhoods, which is all around having the things that you have in your local area. So I won't go into the details of that resource, but please do have a look if you're interested in bringing that into the classroom. And it also involves going, you know, outside. We've got the Big Street Survey, which is very similar. The Big Pedal, which is actually going to be called the Big Walk and Wheel, I think, this coming year. That happens every March, and that's a challenge for pupils to come into school in an active way, and the whole school can take part. So it's really about creating that that community of active travellers in your school. The Sustainable Development Goals were mentioned earlier. We've got a series of resources that, and it's all free and available, that link in with the Sustainable Development Goals too. And there's external resources as well that we've used that work really well, with, including the Place Standard tool, which is another way of looking at your local environment. And we're also linked with Let's Go Zero, where schools can sign up to look at further carbon reduction measures. So that's not only focused on active travel. We also really try and get teachers involved as role models. We're not just about having a resource that can be used in the school. We work very closely with teachers to find out what they need in their schools, what the priorities are of the schools. And we do all sorts of things, like including the carbon literacy training, which is run by Keep Scotland Beautiful. That's really worth doing and allows you to sort of be part of a group, all kind of learning about climate change and carbon reduction, but also thinking about actions that you want to take and kind of setting a plan. We have lots of champions within schools, as I mentioned. Louise is one of them, so I'll hand over to her in a bit, leading these activities, and we work very closely with them, as I said, training them in things like bike maintenance, ride leader training, bikeability training, just enabling them to sort of take the classroom outside and really use bikes and scooters and things as a way of delivering the curriculum. We're also currently starting some e-bike trials. So we've started loaning e-bikes to teachers. And this is a really great way of involving teachers who perhaps might not have thought about getting back on a bike. They perhaps haven't been on a bike for a long time. But it allows us to work with them, and you know, we've had really, really positive results. So we're about to share a lot more e-bikes with the teachers that we work with. And that will be on kind of long-term loans so that they can use them within the school day, but also use them for commuting as well. And the next the kind of way that that we can bring active travel into the curriculum is through all these different activities that we've been running. So we've got a whole range of resources and activities that we run as a team, including wellbeing focused. We've got, as I mentioned, led walks and rides and scoots, and that's allows you to do kind of your school trips by active travel means. So it also gives you a link with your local area, so allowing children to really get to know the areas around them and ways that they can get around them safely. We also link quite a lot with award schemes. So we've run John Muir Award, Duke of Edinburgh Award, and these can work really, really well with, you know, buying schools fleets of scooters, working with fleets of bikes to really take those awards outdoors. As I mentioned before, we run bike maintenance sessions and bikeability training. And I'll hand over to Louise just now to give us a bit of a flavour about what it's actually like in schools. I've given a very sort of whirlwind summary of the kind of things that we can deliver, but I think it's really good to hear how that actually practically works within a school. So I'm going to hand over to Louise to talk.
Hi. I was a teacher that used to work in Falkirk schools, and I have worked very closely with iBike across 3 schools now as well. I think that the last school was probably the most successful because everything just sort of lined up in the way that it should. So basically, like any initiative, you begin by trying to get everybody on board, by trying to get stakeholders to, you know, believe the same things that you believe, and to really back what they need to back in terms of taking it forward. So for me, it was the consultation with senior leadership team and getting the senior leadership team on board. It was the consultation with teaching staff, consultation with support for learning staff, janitors, front office staff. So again, making sure that everybody across the school was included and very much invited to be a part of this as well. Even if they didn't want to lead it, they could certainly support it. Taken from there, once you know we got a suitable number of people on board in order to take it forward, then it was about how are we going to resource this as well. So again, at that point, then I approached Sustrans and asked Sustrans, how can we make this happen? Now, initially in other schools, I borrowed bikes, but that became quite problematic because you couldn't always get the bikes for the times they needed the bikes, and then it meant that only certain classes were able to be trained kind of due to lack of resources. So actually what worked more effectively was having a budget in order just to buy the bikes as well, and buying a range of bikes to suit. That meant that all children had equitable access to the programme as well. Again, we used money from PEF for that as well. We saw this as being a benefit for children's mental health as well as their physical health, and so this has been a very good use of that particular budget. Once the budget was agreed, then we had training was delivered by Brian Jardine from Sustrans, and to be honest, without Brian, I would have to say that I don't think our initiative and project would have been as successful as it was. He was highly supportive and really, I felt, really with us there every step of the journey. We did give challenges as to, this time and date doesn't suit, was very flexible in terms of giving new dates, new times, that type of thing, as well, and very willing and very happy to kind of work with us as well. In terms of supporting staff, again, providing volunteers to be able to support staff with delivery at times, as and when needed and required as well. Again, Sustrans were able to identify what resources it was that we needed, procure the resources for us on our behalf at a reasonable budget for the school in order to buy the fleet of bikes as well. Then to identify basically and deliver the training. The training was over 10 hours. for staff, so it's 10 hours exactly actually. This is not something that's desirable for staff when you say, I want you to give up 10 hours of your time. So again, that is where I guess my sales pitch come in, you know, in terms of this is what you want to do, this is how we want to do it, this is how it's benefited children and families who I've worked with, and this is how it's benefited me personally, you know, as well, and kind of really just selling it to them. And I think just keeping on going with it as well. As any other initiative, you have to just keep driving it forward. Again, some people think if we have, you know, if we've trained one set of children, that's us, we've ticked the box, we can move on and go on to the next initiative. But it's actually, you know, it's actually about still understanding that this initiative is not going away. This initiative is just as important. Again, we built the bikeability into, you know, our PE program. So it wasn't a, you know, you can do this if you like. You know, this was a kind of a have to, you know, as well, because actually we want all our primary 5 to 7s at that point, we want them all bikeability level 1 trained. And, you know, incidentally, they were all bikeability level 1 trained. We then had the, you know, added complication of, we had our enhanced provision children as well, but ensuring that actually they had equitable access, you know, to be able to actively travel as well. So again, that was back to the drawing board with SUSTRANS. How was this going to happen? Back to the drawing board with Cycling Scotland. How could they support as well? And really just very much trying to take that forward, ensuring that every child, you know, was part of the journey as well. In terms of you know, we were able to organise class rides, we were able to organise class scouts. SUSTRANS very kindly organised volunteers, because as schools we don't have the resources of people at our fingertips, unfortunately, as well. So in order for us to be able to safely go, and for ratios to be suitable for us to go out on the road, again, SUSTRANS you know, organised really all of that, taking the complications out of our hands, which was great and very much appreciated. In terms of then the class rides then led to us being able to explore the community out with our school. It also helped us to understand what was there beyond just being able to take classes out for a walk as well. Again, this was beneficial, hugely beneficial in terms of COVID, because you know, we didn't want to travel in buses, we weren't able to travel in buses as well. So actually class trips were able to be facilitated through the medium of either scooting somewhere or cycling somewhere as well. Again, families becoming more aware of space roundabout within the community. Families, you know, were actively talking about going to the places that we had been because their child had enjoyed the visit through the school as well. Again, linking families up with resources. Actually, we gave bikes as Christmas presents, and we had older bikes, and again, that was families who maybe couldn't afford bikes, but actually their child had just learned to cycle, and what they wanted for Christmas was a bike. So again, being able to say, here's a bike. It is a very much well used and loved bike, but it is a bike, and you know, just being able to kind of to touch families in that way was really great as well. In terms of bringing everything together, you know, we've linked in with the Break charity, and we've done lots of work around Be Bright, Be Seen. We've done lots of work within our health and wellbeing lessons. We've obviously linked in our road safety and our cycling safety as well. We've had our active travel breakfast, so again, just promoting that health and wellbeing aspect of eating and travelling as well. We've had our energy bike classes, our bling your bike classes, that type of thing as well. So again, you know, it's bringing lots of things together in a way that's kind of celebrates, you know, what we're trying to do, and really heralds why we're doing it as well. I do believe that we have seen improved mental and physical health. We've definitely increased our relations with partner agencies such as SUSTRANS, such as Break Charity, with the local high school as well. Again, the local high school, they train their children within bike maintenance, and they've got their cycling workshop. So again, they were able to come and help us facilitate lessons. Dr. Bike was able to come out and deliver bike maintenance lessons with our children as well. So again, we had the life skill development there for our children too. In terms of reluctant learners, we had children who didn't really want to actively participate within the class, but then when we took them outdoors, their participation increased as well. And again, for those children, you know, we were really getting it right for them, because actually, you know, this was the way that they were able to learn as well.
Last minute, folks.
Thank you. And I just really, to be honest, I'd just like to say that actually seeing non-cyclists cycle is just an absolute joy. Seeing reluctant learners engage is hugely rewarding. Just the work with SUSTRANS, as I say, we wouldn't really have got through any of this without the sort of the support of Brian Jardine from SUSTRANS and the volunteers within SUSTRANS to really take everything forward and to be as successful as we were as a school within our council. Thank you.
Thank you to you both for your contribution there, and again, really helpful to hear the practical solutions that we have, practical options that we have to support our educational establishments in this area. And comment in the chat function around one of our colleagues who has made use of the kind of SUSTRANS approach and otherwise around trialling an e-bike for themselves and a try before you buy situation, so that they were actually making that good thing. So thanks, Jackie, for letting us know about that. We're going to come to the questions around this as we move into after we've had the final speaker, and I want to welcome to our final part of our session Parveen Dhaliwal. Sorry, Parveen. Late night menopausal brain. Dhaliwal. Parveen, welcome to our session. Parveen is a champion and for Send My Friend, and she's been a champion with them for 2 years now. During this time, she's been communicating directly with the local MSPs through the Send My Friend to School Action Day, as well as working with organisations such as Oxfam and Save the Children. Really crucial ventures to see this work taken forward, particularly with young people in our establishments. And so I'm really delighted to have you with us this evening, Parveen, and I'll pass over to you now.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a nice evening. I'm just going to share my presentation. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. Okay. Yeah, okay. So a bit about who I am. My name is Parveen, I'm 17 and I'm year 12. And I've been a campaign champion for Send My Friend to School for 2 years. I'm also part of the YPHG for the National Institution of Health Research at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and I volunteer at my local Oxfam bookshop on the weekends. And there's some other information down there. So a bit about Send My Friend to School. So Send My Friend to School is the UK coalition of the Global Campaign for Education. The GCE is an organisation working to ensure quality education for all children, with members in over 90 countries. Here in the UK, each year, thousands and thousands of schools and young people take part in the Send My Friend campaign, teaching young people the power and importance of using their voices in chorus with others across the globe to create positive change. So a few people that the Send My Friend School works with is teachers' unions and charities, and young people bring together politicians and the media to demand quality education for children all across the globe. Yeah, so the right climate to learn, and this is the first campaign year that I was part of, and it's basically talking about, so despite the fact that we have global commitments, so SDG 4, Sustainable Development Goal 4, education is still being interrupted for a large amount of children around the globe. And one of those interruptions is due to the effects of climate change, and we are seeing an increased number of climate refugees that have homes and schools destroyed and damaged. And so I like to use the hole in the boat analogy to describe the effects of climate change. So if we use the water as saying that the water is climate change, and there's a hole in this boat and it's slowly filling up. And so the man in front who's screaming, he's going to bear the effects first. And so we're talking about marginalized countries and more poorer countries, they start to bear the effects first. However, we are all in the same boat, and therefore we all need to work together to patch the boat up and get our climate back on track. So I put some examples of some articles. So climate change doesn't just affect the low income countries, it also affects schools in the UK. And the article says, as it continues to warm, we are going to see more and more extreme weather, such as heat waves and floods. Slide. So COP26, why is this important? The COP26 summit will bring parties together to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The UK is committed to working with all countries, joining forces with civil society companies and people on the front line of climate change to inspire climate action ahead of COP26. So it's a really important year. And so what have I been doing as a campaign champion to bring attention and awareness to this event? So I've been using various different methods of campaigning for the upcoming important events at the time. So it was COP26, G7, GPE replenishment. And so talking with Oxfam members in the panel to explain the importance of making local MPs and politicians aware of how important these events are, and they are a pivotal moment for global education, leading assemblies, making video campaigns, and talking about how the UK has to be a leader with stuff like Brexit and international relations being at an all-time low. We need to be a leader and set the precedent for what we should be doing towards climate change to meet the Paris Agreement. And so learning to write letters and correspondence to MPs and just trying to get young people's points across and our viewpoints on climate change. So why do young people need to be involved? So I added a case study from the Send My Friend to School policy report for climate change. And this talks about young people being key to response in Guatemala. And the program has, and this is a little extract from it. So the program has dual purpose of youth empowerment and climate change advocacy, engaging young people in education-centered resilience and awareness-raising efforts is critical to improving the futures for those most affected by climate change. And then young people are the main individuals who will start to bear the effects of climate change and therefore need to be aware of what is going on. And I also added my own opinion on why young people need to be aware, is that, so for example, this 18-year-old, he was doing a Google Science Fair competition, and he found this magnetic liquid that attracts plastic particles by removing them from the water. And after close to 1,000 tests, his method successfully removed nearly 88% of the microplastics from water samples. And they plan to apply his design to larger bodies of water in the future. So it's not only important to make young people aware so that they can campaign, but also so that we can, we have the knowledge and the ability to create future inventions to deal with climate change. So what we would like to see happen. So the UK should take action in COP26 and be a global leader, and to work collaboratively across ministries to help create an integrated approach to climate change and education. So previously in Send My Friend, we asked for the government to contribute £600 million to GPE replenishment. And I decided to add this short thing of the UK government reducing aid to poorer countries to 0.5%. And even though it seems like a small percentage, it's still a large amount of money. And so still campaigning and making sure that children all around the world can still get their education to decrease inequality. So I talked to some of my peers and what they would like to see in terms of climate education in school. So we want to be taught the realities of climate change, and someone said that they would like more clarity with statistics as to where they come from, etc. But this should be done in a way that is not anxiety inducing. So a lot of the time it's like some people feel like it's too much, or they say that, oh yeah, you know what, I feel like the world is going to end tomorrow. So just do it in a way that is not anxiety inducing, and that we can use analogies such as the hole in the boat, especially for the younger years, or we can be provided with the skills to campaign, advocate, and research with guidance. So saying that this is happening, but this is what you can do to deal with it. Because often what would happen is you'd get taught, oh, this is what climate change is, but you'd be just left at that. And so being given the skills to campaign ourselves so that we have a part and our voices heard. And also getting professionals to come and speak, or and just to get clarity as to what is actually happening, because a lot of teachers, some teachers, they might not know, and so just getting those professionals to come and speak to young people. And so I talked about teaching young people to campaign, and so this can be done in many ways. So it can be done through teaching skills for professional writing, letter writing to MPs and other figures, and to allow students to create campaign groups within schools. So this doesn't just apply to climate change, it can apply to many other campaigns that students feel that they are passionate about. And to facilitate the use of social media platforms as an aid for these campaigns, so Instagram and especially Twitter. A lot of young people that I know don't use Twitter at all. However, a lot of MPs do, and that ends up being one of the main ways that they communicate with the public. So speech writing, so one technique was Aforest that we learned within Send My Friend to School. And creating and encouraging students to find their own strengths in ways of campaigning. So say, for example, animation, or maybe drawing, making videos where they draw out certain stuff, or talking directly to the camera, and poetry. So there's lots of resources on the Send My Friend to School. So I remember when I was talking to my peers and teaching making the lower school aware of what Send My Friend to School does, and a lot of these were used. So there's a free schools pack, and which is available to download. And also Send My Friend to School is recruiting new champions in November. So you can apply to be a 2022 campaign champion. So this says 2021, but soon it'll probably change. So you can apply through the website, and there's loads of resources that you can get through the website. Thank you, and I hope you have a nice evening. I was very nervous, but I hope it was good.
Arvine, you were absolutely marvellous. You wouldn't have known that you were nervous, and I'm sure my colleagues and I would have welcomed the opportunity to hear from you and from the young person's voice in this particular area. Really important, the things that you've contributed there, and actually a reference to one of the first questions we're going to take for the panel, which was around the fact that young people can feel helpless and suffering maybe from eco-anxiety, if you like, around these areas, and how teachers are looking for ways to engage with their students in this area without making it worse in terms of the anxiety that the whole situation can lead us to. So I wonder if any of the panelists can give us any thoughts on how teachers or staff might be able to engage their young people who are maybe looking like they're switching off, or are demonstrating that they are feeling depressed or helpless in this area, to be able to provide hopeful lessons that can engage them in the discussion around climate change. Who'd like to have a shot at that simple question at this time of night?
Yeah.
Anybody? Well, can I say to you then, colleagues, while you're thinking about that, it might be a good opportunity also to mention the futures webinars that we have. They are looking at different areas of this one, but particularly session 4, where we will be looking at supporting young people with eco-anxiety. So that's a particular area of work, but we're just wondering if there's any additional ideas or resources that people might have to not diminish the seriousness of this, but otherwise, I can see that we're putting some of the ideas into the chat function. We're going to need to bring those together in order to share them, because our people can't necessarily see all of the details in the chat function, so we will get that out there. But I can see that folks are sharing some extra information on it. We had other, maybe not quite such a, maybe one for you to be able to promote some of your own areas of work or beyond, where we're looking for any sites or lesson plans with bite-sized chunks or otherwise. Again, we'll be looking to do this. I know that you've shared some of these in your presentations. Any other areas of work that you would like to cite, Dave?
Yeah, so sorry, I was confused by the mute because it kept going mute and then unmute on my screen. But it is late now. So just on that climate anxiety point, because I think it's really important, and Claudia in the chat says it's present not just in students and young people, but in teachers as well. And I think it's important to acknowledge that's completely valid. That's probably right to be anxious. We are in a climate emergency. So that is part of the communication, the education, but more important is to then talk about what we can do, and there are solutions. You know, the Paris Climate Agreement that we talked about, you know, Parveen talked about it in terms of 1.5 degrees, that is still possible. That is still within our power to deliver as a society globally. So I think that giving the facts is important, the scientific basis, but then talking about what actions we can take as individuals, as schools, as communities, and as governments, you know, as nations, actually that's empowering. And so for my students at uni, you know, they have an awful time because the first course they do is climate change impacts and adaptation. So they just hear about, these are the scenarios of heat waves, of floods, of sea level rise, and it's a bit of a baptism by fire in terms of the science. But then we say, well, these are all potential futures. They're not realized. Climate change is real and it's impacting people now, but actually how bad it gets is down to what we do this year and in this decade. And I think if we can communicate that through our teaching, through the solutions that we can take, then the eco-anxiety, you know, can be something that is actually healthy. We build on that. You know, we have anxiety about everything in life. It's an anxious thing to be human, isn't it? Particularly, you know, with the pandemic and everything else. But we can still function and we can do stuff. And that message, I think, is one that we need to focus on, particularly with the climate emergency.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else want to come in? Nope. Okay. I think that. Oh, Charlotte.
Just popped in the chat. I think, you know, that thing around having tangible actions. You know, it's a lot when we're doing learning around climate change. We get a lot of facts, and you know, it can be scary. Then actually being able to physically do something. And I think, yeah, things like you know, finding an area that you can grow fruit and veg around the school, or you know, something that's practical and is you feel like you're actually doing something, can really help as well. And yeah, as I would say, active travel is one of those things, but I think there's a whole range of things that you know, classes can do, rather than, you know, placing it on individual families and making it a sort of, you know, very big problem for you know, and that you feel like you have to sort of tackle yourself. I think tackling things as a group can be quite empowering as well. So doing things on a whole school scale, which is realistic, but it's more impactful than just trying to do things as an individual.
I think for our children in school, it would be quite inspirational to have people who are making things happen in the real world as well. So really having the experts, either, you know, via Microsoft Teams or you know, obviously in line with COVID, it's maybe not practical to people into schools at the minute, but certainly I think that would be, you know, I'm thinking of all the speakers today, but in particular the Greenpeace, you know, as well. I thought if they could see themselves, you know, being the champions, you know, to kind of herald these sorts of initiatives, you know, that for me, for a lot of our children would be really quite exciting, and actually somebody whose job it is to do that, you know, as well, because they could hear it from me, but I don't think it would mean the same that if they heard it from someone who's actually done it, you know, and who's actually lived through these rallies and lived through these non-violent protests and this type of thing as well. So that's something that I would certainly look into. As a school, you know, we are focusing very much on climate change. We'll be starting that next month, you know, as well. So I'll be looking to kind of drive that forward across the school. I'm only in a supply right now, but I can be quite persuasive, so I'll give it a go.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your contributions. That's really helpful. I think it is the getting a variety of approaches. The Learning for Sustainability report and the work that's there within the curriculum allows us these opportunities. And some of it is about, as you say, the tangible actions, the things that can make a difference just in your own wee patch, and building that to show that it's more, that it's all of these small things together that make the difference. It wouldn't be one big single thing that will be able to change this for us, and maybe makes you feel a wee bit more in control of your own wee bit of it. I'm going to wrap things up for everybody this evening, colleagues, and say first of all a huge thank you to all of our panelists this evening. It's really challenging at times for people to see ways to support young people and in our schools, and it's a testament to the profession that so many, we had over 170 people online earlier this evening around this after what's been a busy day and a busy term, but actually they've come along because they've seen a real interest in the quality of panelists that we've had, such a wide range of subjects and approaches in and around this. So really helpful, and thank you so much for your contributions to this evening. Colleagues, I mentioned earlier that we have 2 more webinars to take place. You'll find the details for that on the website. If you've not already signed up, there's a fair chance if you're here tonight, you might well have already signed up, but please consider doing so. The next one will be the 27th of October, and then the 3rd of November for that. For that. We're also looking, as I said at the beginning, for you to be brave and share your work with your colleagues. There's the thing around the resources. It's people in real schools doing real work, working with the young people, responding to the need of the young people, sharing that with colleagues. Better that than some great company producing it for some money. Let's share and recycle and be involved in that. The other area that I am hugely passionate around is the work that our Education Committee has been doing around the online exhibition of pupil work, and that will begin around COP, but it will run beyond COP, and our vision is that there will be an online museum which will have lots of examples of the work that our young people and our establishments are doing on climate change, on the Learning for Sustainability agenda, and we'll be there for you to take your classes into virtually to see and share and learn from, and then grow and do more from. So please look on the website and get your information and get that in and shared. Be brave, be bold. The work we are doing in our schools deserves to be celebrated. Let's do it together and let's share it together. Colleagues, thank you for attending. Thank you to everybody in the EIS for organising this event and for everything that's there. And a final thank you once again to all of our fabulous presenters this evening. Really appreciate everything that you did for us, and wishing you all the very best. I was going to say safe home, but I think most of you are home. It's just me that's still got to go and get the subway home. So thank you very much, everybody. Take care and have a good evening.